Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. And we are happy to welcome a new contributor this week. His name is Alejandro Ramos. Alejandro, this is my first time meeting you as well, but could you take just a moment to tell us just a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Sure. As you mentioned, my name is Alejandro Ramos, and I am a contributor for Young Voices. I am also the executive director of the Ramos Research Institute, and currently I'm based in Ithaca, New York at Cornell University, wrapping up a program here, focusing on education policy, but my passion is in civic engagement, as we'll discuss today within the Hispanic voting bloc, as I saw some changes happening within my own family, being a member of the Hispanic community. So I'm excited to have this discussion with you today, Brian.
Yeah, I'm looking at this article that is published in Counterpunch that you wrote. It's called Trump's Hispanic Dilemma, Promises Made, Promises Broken. And I'm thinking back to election night, and it's pretty clear that in getting elected, Donald Trump actually drew rather strongly from the Hispanic community. Talk to me a little bit about why more Hispanics went for him this time than in the previous election in 2020. And then let's talk about some of those promises made as well as the promises broken.
Sure. So I think it's important to start off with going back to 2016. In 2016, he garnered 28% of the Hispanic vote, which was a shock for people based on the rhetoric that, he was saying against the Hispanic community. All Hispanics are Mexicans and they're rapists, drug dealers. But nonetheless, he was able to garner 28% of the support. Jumping to 2020, he was able to garner 32% of the vote, which shocked people even more. And then when we come to the most recent election, 2024, he was really able to garner 46% of the vote within the Hispanic population, the most that any Republican has ever able to garner. The second highest was Bush in 2004 with 40%. So people were shocked. And, I think that there are a few reasons. And, as I mentioned, being Hispanic, although I'm Cuban and, Cubans tend to be more right-leaning, within my own family, on my dad's side of the family, union workers picketed during the Obama years with the union and were supporters of the former president, Obama. In 2016, I never forget sitting in their living room and them saying, "We're voting for Trump. We like this guy." And I'm like, hold on, wait a second. What is going on, right? Because it was a shock to me, right? I grew up in, with them always saying, oh, Democrats, Republicans, don't care about us. And all of a sudden, this all changed. I think that there's a few things about Trump, specifically in this election, that made Hispanics sort of more open to supporting him, again, with 46% of the vote. And I think it was with three things. It was the economy, it was education, and it was immigration reform. I'm shocked that those numbers are actually much higher than I thought for this last election. But anyway, you were mentioning the three things that he promised. How's he done on delivering? I mean, he's been very busy for the last 8 weeks, but how has he done on delivering on those specific promises? Sure. I think busy is an understatement for this administration. But, I think that across the three areas, we'll start with the economy. I think that people are a little concerned. I mean, I think there's a lot of individuals that are concerned, but within the Hispanic community, with inflation and wage stagnation, that there's a little bit of concern there that, the economy isn't bouncing back as quickly as members of this community would have liked it to bounce. And I think with that, hopefully there will be some changes, hopefully soon. With the members that I've spoken to of the community, a big concern is grocery prices. Groceries are already a struggle to purchase. And then you throw in the mix with the high egg prices, that eggs are a cheap protein. And all of a sudden it's, as I remember growing up, the cheap meal, if, you needed a cheap meal, was rice with fried eggs. And that's what we ate. And I think that that's a staple within a lot of Hispanic communities, households, and especially with Cubans with some fried plantains too, which I still make to this day, and it's quite delicious. So, Brian, I think that that's, a big concern there in terms of the economy. When we move to immigration, I think that we see this dilemma with the Hispanic community, which was spoken about much after this election, that once members of the community come to the United States and they immigrate here, they're very proud to be Americans. They come to this country, for the opportunity to be able to escape whatever it is that they're fleeing from their home country. And as soon as they are able to become citizens themselves, they very much identify as Americans. And they very quickly become anti-immigrant, which is interesting to see. So I think that in that regard, individuals were expecting there to be, of course, a crackdown on immigration, whether if it was sanctuary city lawsuits or expedited removals. But, I think that the issue that people are now having, that it's not only the individuals that have committed crimes and that have done wrongdoings, but it's, the person that owns the bodega down the street, or the person that, you see every day on your way to work. So I think that there's some issues there that, members of the community are having, and they're saying, hold on, you promised that we were deporting the criminals, the people that are here doing bad, but the rest of us were supposed to be safe, right? Whether you're a worker on a farm, or whether you work in a bodega, or whatever it is that you do, and you've been able to, a lot of individuals within this community also start their own businesses. So, and I think there's a lot of fear right now, because they are all saying, oh, now we're all sort of in trouble. It's not just the criminals like he promised.
So a quick question for you, Alejandro, and that is, what is the Trump administration doing to streamline the process for those people who want to come here, who come here looking to be productive entrepreneurial citizens, and to basically take hold of that dream? Is the Trump administration doing anything to remove some of the bureaucratic obstacles that are in their way currently?
Unfortunately, not at the moment. Which I think that, and this could be a whole topic for another day, Brian, but I think that the immigration system overall needs to be overhauled, right? And I think that's something that both Republicans and Democrats could agree on. We need border security, but we also need to fix the system that's very broken. And at the moment, these individuals don't have a path forward, right? Whether if it's through whatever avenues, once you're in the country, or if you're still in your home country, to be able to make that leap. So I think that could be an area of improvement for the administration as well.
Talk to me about education. Where is Trump falling short on that promise?
So I think on education, for many individuals across the United States, it's the key to mobility, for economic freedom, and to be able to sort of get out of whatever situation that you're in currently. And I think that he focused on the campaign trail on school choice and vocational training. And I know that that's not the responsibility of the federal government, as they don't lay curriculum, and that's back to the states. But I think that Trump has the power to influence whatever policy currently in the country, with Republican governors, with state legislatures. So I think that if he made a little bit further of a push for school choice, and to have more of these vocational programs, and change sort of the funding elements in these states, I think that Hispanics would be much, much happier.
So something you point out in your article that I thought was really on target here is Trump shouldn't make the same mistake that the Democrats made of taking the Hispanic voting bloc for granted. What does he need to do to make sure that he can count on their support, or at least the GOP can count on their support moving forward?
Sure. So I think that the Hispanic voters, without a doubt, rewarded Trump in 2024 for speaking on these areas that they truly care about. I think moving forward, what either party has to do, but for the Republicans, they need to listen. It can't be a thing of every 4 years, oh, we need to mobilize. It needs to be continued support throughout the 4 years. We need to listen. We need to hear your concerns, and we need to make an impact so that, the vote stays within the GOP. And, a while back, I made a prediction that in 2040, they would have the majority. And I think it might happen sooner than that, as long as they listen and they're delivering on promises for the Hispanic community.
All right. Once again, we are visiting with Alejandro Ramos. He is a Young Voices contributor based at Cornell University, and also the founder and executive director of the Ramos Research Institute. Alejandro, where can people find you and follow you on social media?
You could find me at Ramos Research Institute, or on Twitter, or now X, Alejandro J. Ramos. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a great conversation. I look forward to the next time we can talk.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, Brian.
And we are back on Moving Forward with Young Voices. I'm joined by William Barclay. He's been on this program before, but for the folks who are meeting you for the very first time, take a moment and just tell us a little bit about who you are and about your background.
As you said, I've been here a couple of times. My name is William Barclay. I'm a political theorist and a contributor for Young Voices. I present my work around the world at places like the Human Rights Council, the University of Oxford, and I've published a few articles in newspapers such as the Times of Israel and the Hill Times, as well as Real Clear Politics.
I noticed you had a very interesting take on the recent German elections, which just took place here a couple of weeks ago. I was following that because I have kids who live in Germany, and one's going to school and one is actually, living there and raising a family. But I was very interested in that election because when I was visiting Germany last summer, I saw political banners and signs everywhere. And interestingly enough, what made it interesting to me was, some of them defaced. It was like, okay, people are definitely engaged and invested in this. Talk to me about the outcome of that election, and then let's talk about one party in particular that seems to get kicked around a lot, maybe without deserving to be kicked around.
Well, so I think that the big issue here is that over the past decade, I'd like to say throughout the modern era, Germany as well as other European nations have been severely destabilized. I mean, fraught with insecurity because of their hyper-liberal migration policies and the open borders of the EU. And during the last election, there was very much a sharp turn back towards, let's say, the right wing. And away from the very leftist parties. In particular, probably the most right-wing party of them all, the AfD, received almost 21% of the popular vote. So it actually finished second in the whole election, and that was a big story, right? Because here in the West, and I'd say in other more leftist political circles, they've been labeled as an extremist party and all the stuff that comes with that, Nazis, racists, bigots, everything that can be attached to it in Germany. And it's just simply not true. It's very much been an effort to kind of shame the common people away from the right wing of the political spectrum and to kind of deny very much what the people have expressed themselves, to delegitimize it in a lot of ways.
And you point this out in your article. One of the things that brings that criticism to AfD is not so much that they're being extreme, but just that they are committed to what the principles that they're trying to uphold. They don't waver. And they're not trying to test the wind and see, well, how do people feel? And we'll say we feel this way today and this way tomorrow. They actually have a very clear vision of what they stand for. And apparently that is seen as a threat to some of the other parties and powers that be.
Oh, 100%. I think that we've been kind of commandeered towards this era of abject diversity, right? And I think that in a lot of ways, maybe the big thing here is that nationalism has become a dirty word in the modern era, right? You're unable to say that, let's say, you are proud of your country, you're proud of your people, and in fact, you're proud of the values and the principles that have predicated that country. And I think that's very much what the AfD is trying to do here, is reestablish national pride and earnest commitment to kind of progress for the German nation in the future. And in a lot of ways, again, the people are the ones who have suffered over the past decades. It's not the elite, so to speak. It's not the people who've been espousing this globalist agenda. It's very much the people on the ground. And they've been, I think it's two people every year for the past decade have been killed by terrorist attacks in Germany. Right. I think that anyways, there's a little bit of a disjunct between, let's say, the people who are preaching kind of open borders and abject diversity and the people who are forced to live it and experience it day to day.
I think the last time you and I talked, we spoke about populism and how populism is portrayed as, oh, that's a scary kind of movement. And you did a very good job of showing, no, actually, it's a very legitimate movement, and obviously there's a very populist flavor to AfD and what they're doing. For those who need a good, just baseline definition of populism, how would you explain it to them?
Well, I'd ask them a question. I'd ask them to tell me how populism is at all different from diversity. Right. And I'd let them ruminate on that for a little bit. Right. Because it seems to me that populism is maybe misconstrued as this mass of people who have been, let's say, misled by a popular leader. Right. And in a way, it divorces the people themselves of any autonomy or any legitimacy. Right. Like these people apparently haven't made this decision for themselves. They don't know what they want. And they're in a way incapable of making these decisions. Are very much the implications of anybody who disparages populism and uses it as an epithet. I think in a lot of ways, similarly to kind of what's happened with the AfD, this ghoul of populism has been trotted out, again, to shame people away from the right wing of the political spectrum and say it's an enemy of democracy, it's an enemy of human rights, when in fact, if you look at the things that populists espouse, espouse. And again, I think that in a way, populism is an old word that's been trotted out and given a new definition by the left in order to disparage and discredit Donald Trump, specifically post 2016. I think maybe we should touch on that in particular, because I don't think most people who use populism disparagingly or as this epithet would be able to name another populist leader outside of Donald Trump. In a way, I think they've retroactively named people like Reagan as populists when in the past they were tried as neocons. And so anyways, I think that it's very much been a symptom of the post-Trump era and something that's been used to push people away from that right wing of the political spectrum and towards so-called progressive politics.
One of the things that you offer in your article as well in defense of the AfD is you tackle the question, are they extremists? Certainly people are calling them extremist, but unless you believe in word magic, if I say this, then it becomes that. Do their actions, do their stances line up with extremism?
Not at all. I think the other thing too is that a lot of times various problematic members or people who've espoused radical beliefs in the past, and very much in the past, the other thing I would like to say, like years and years in the past, are trotted as examples of the AfD's extremism. And it's simply, it's in a way a straw man argument. There are countless political parties that have members who've espoused, let's say, radical views. And these parties themselves aren't thrown out with the bathwater. The NDP itself in Canada and the Green Party, I think the Green Party's leader herself has espoused remarkably anti-Semitic views. And we still consider them a legitimate party, right? Because they're on the left, though. As soon as a right-wing party says anything that could be at all misconstrued as hyperbolic or radical, it's game over. And I think that the other thing, too, is, again, populism has been used as a catch-all word for right-wing extremism. It's been rendered synonymous with it throughout the modern era, and it's simply not true. When you ask people, why are the AfD extremists, why are they radical? Well, they're populists, as though it means that they have to be extremists and radical. It's simply not true. I think the other thing, too, is a lot of what they're saying is backed up by fact, particularly with regards to, let's say, migrant-related crime and the disjunct, or let's say the inherent contradictions that exist between Islamic fundamentalism and liberal society.
Yeah, this was another point that you make about, where so many of those migrants are coming from, seeking asylum. And I saw it with my own eyes when I was in Germany last summer. There's a clear disconnect between a lot of the people who have come there. And I don't mean to denigrate everybody. I'm just saying assimilation does not seem
I was about to say, you're not allowed to talk about it because of the color of your skin, eh?
Right,
do you notice that?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I can say it freely, right? It's the funniest thing. Like, online, I was watching all the comments. I could see people on the verge of calling me a racist or a xenophobe and stuff like that, but they can't, right? And it's this weird credentialism, right? Because of the way I look, I can say certain things. And, like, isn't that the most discriminatory thing? Isn't that, like, anyways, I could go on about this forever, but in part, this is why I wrote the paper, because I knew nobody else would say anything, right? And it's a travesty, because at the end of the day, say what you want about the AfD and all these political, like the politics of it all, but the German people are very much the people that suffer, right? And that have been forced to deal with this over the years. I think that the statistic I heard the other day, or actually I think is in this article, 15% of Germany's population are migrants. They accounted for 41% of the crime. Right. And from, I think, 2022, crime increased by 23%, 2023, 18%. Again, this isn't me saying this. This is Germany's official statistics, and there's no way around it. I mean, even politicians like the former chancellor, who was very much in favor of these open borders and hyper-liberal migration policies, has done a 180, sorry, and has started to say that we need to deport these people. There's no place for terrorists in Germany. And it's just remarkable, kind of the shift over the past decade.
Well, I'm glad that you're saying what you're saying, and I think I wish that there were more voices that were joining in and at least giving a fair shake to AfD. It's so easy to throw epithets, but a lot of people, I think, are unfairly tarred in that process, and it's...
Well, 21% of the German population, right? They're thrown under the bus, too. They're viewed as racist, xenophobe, Nazis, all this kind of stuff like that. And the inevitable consequence of that is political polarization. I think we touched on this last time with the populism article, where if you're unable to engage in earnest political discourse with somebody in a society, they inevitably become your enemy, right? And it will become violent. How can you tolerate, how can you abide somebody, inhabit the same social confines peaceably if you consider them to be an enemy, and not just an enemy to you, but your children, people around you, and proactively seeking to destroy you, which is the other thing that comes along with this, right? It's not, when people try to misconstrue them as extremists and populists and all this, it's not really in the effort to let them be and kind of, leave them over there in the corner. It's to eradicate them and do away with them altogether. And that's simply that's frightening for one, but it's incorrect.
Again, we are talking with... I'm sorry, William, we are up against the clock here. We're talking with William Barclay. He is a Young Voices contributor, and I'm I'm so appreciative for you speaking out and saying what you're saying. Where can people follow you? Where can they find your work?
They can find me on Twitter or X at Will Barclay BBC, and on the Young Voices website. By all means, send them an email if you want. I'd love to speak with you and have a chat.
And we are back on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Alex Rosado back to the program. Alex, you and I get to see each other on a regular basis, and I'm always better for it because I learn so much from you. For people meeting you for the first time, take a moment, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, so thank you again once for having me. I'm Alex Rosado, and I am a professional programs assistant at the Alexander Hamilton Society. They are a nonprofit organization and nonpartisan at that, so everything I say is in my own personal capacity. All
right, so I think I'm keeping an eye on trade issues. I mean, I'm hearing about tariffs, and then I realize, wow, I've got the blinders on here because there are aspects of trade, and I'm talking particularly the U.S. and China, that I have kind of been flying blind about. And I'm looking at your article, Returning to Phase One is a Step Backward. And the first thing I'd like to ask you is, bring me up to speed. When we talk about Phase One, what does that refer to regarding U.S. and China trade?
How much time do you have? Well, I think especially with Phase One, it is one of the many sagas that have been within the U.S.-China trade relations, at least since the 2000s. So this came about with Donald Trump back in 2016 when he was a presidential candidate, declaring that China was a nation for job theft, for American jobs, when he was rallying in Pennsylvania. He kept through on that promise and has had a tough on China approach within his first term. And he designated a lot of what China's malpractices, especially with currency fluctuation and trying to bypass some regulatory barriers, as predatory. So he said, okay, let me slap some tariffs on you in terms of trying to hold them accountable. That launched the first U.S.-China trade war, where tariffs went up to about 22%. And in order to get China to come to the table, it was, for better or worse, an effective mechanism to have a deal come about. And that's exactly what Phase One sought to do.
So where do we stand right now with China? I mean, amidst all the tariffs back and forth with Canada, with Mexico, and with other countries, I kind of lost track of China. So is China chugging along? Is their economic engine running smoothly? Are they feeling effects like we've been feeling of, I don't know if I dare use the term recession, but are there some areas of their economy that struggle?
Certainly, and especially when it comes to China's international output, in some aspects, they are dominating world trade. But when it comes to domestic, their economy isn't doing so hot. For the last 30 years or so, they've been relying on investment in general and also trying to boost their housing market. But they haven't been doing a fantastic job in terms of actually adhering to those policies. They're relying a lot on exports as opposed to imports. And that way, a lot of their influence is being spread across, but there's no money really coming in. And that's because their GDP growth has been slowing to a rate of about 5%. And that's a stark drop from 7 to 8% that you saw at least through the 2010s. You've also saw that the liberal government of Xi Jinping that has been in power since late 2012 has really cracked down on a lot of free speech, free market, and not state-run policies. Their demographics are also suffering as well. Very, very lopsided in terms of demographic, not even replacement, but sustainability. They unfortunately don't have, or at least fortunately for the US, in a Chinese perspective, they unfortunately don't have really those core ingredients to keep their economy going in the long term. So right now they're trying to expedite and have a lot of efficiency within the international sector to offset it.
So is it safe to say that the U.S. is in a stronger position now than it was in 2020?
I would say so, and that comes about with a brand new president as well, with Trump's second term, and Biden's policies certainly didn't set us up to compete within the great power competition. I mean, take a look at President Trump's record economically the first time around. Unemployment, 50-year low, hovering at about 3.5%. You saw a lot of investment, specifically capital investment, that boosted consumer spending, got more participants within the economy, pushing free market policies, especially towards China, like IP utilization, and making sure that the United States was set, at least in a better position, to go against adversaries like China that have, for a long time, fleecing U.S. trade deals and economic agreements.
So is it China that is pushing to revive the Phase One trade deal?
Yes, so that is one of their many approaches to the second Trump administration. And that's because Trump went out the door and said, all right, let's bring back some of these tariffs. You saw within his first day of office, he enacted what he called an America First trade policy memorandum, which wanted to review a lot of trade relationships bilaterally, particularly with China. After the U.S. trade representatives saw that this wasn't working, Trump said, let's bring back the tariffs. About 10% got imposed in February. China said, well, if you're going to do that to us, we'll do some retaliatory tariffs on coal, liquefied gas, some agricultural machinery. And you've been seeing this kind of tit for tat nature for a long time. But Trump raised tariffs again back in March to 20%. And now China is coming to the table and saying, well, let's get this trade deal back. Because one, they didn't abide by it, and that was for many measures which we can go into, but also it's just kind of a cop-out to say that at least there's something on the table that we can agree to in principle.
So when they, you mentioned in the article that they didn't uphold their commitments to that first phase one trade deal, were there any specifics that they violated or that they failed to meet?
Yes, so particularly with agriculture, they were meant to pay about $200 billion worth of investments to the United States, as opposed to the U.S. owing them some sort of concession. But you saw, due to a multiplicity of factors, one of them being the COVID pandemic and a lot of them just being Chinese national sentiment saying that this deal wasn't working for China, they only fulfilled about 59% of their agreements total, manufacture-wise. But with agriculture, they only got up to 83%. And some people may say, well, that's a success for phase one. But there was also confounding factors such as an African swine fever outbreak that contributed to a lot of China increasing their pork imports, and then also some World Trade Organization rulings that forced China to play ball and play fair with the United States. So you can't solely contribute all of that success to phase one. You have to take into account a lot of the broader economic and international picture.
But you mentioned the U.S. actually did uphold its commitments under that agreement.
Yes, it is. Yes. So the United States did a lot of reform, especially within the areas, as mentioned beforehand, with intellectual property. They tried to have more of a fair ground when it comes to agriculture, particularly with wheat, soybean, and pork. You actually just saw yesterday that China has renewed their export registrations for U.S. pork, which certainly helps U.S. farmers try and have more of a market to share their products and foster productivity and bolster that commitment within the states. So the United States is doing its part, but China, for one reason or another, just does not want to give the U.S. any credit. For example, with transshipment, you saw that their exports to Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia have surged basically 97%, about $110 billion to try and get around some of these stipulations that are within the trade deal. It's because, as we mentioned beforehand, China's domestic economy is weak, so they're going to do anything and everything they can internationally to try and make phase one as irrelevant as possible.
So, Alex, tell me this. Where is the U.S. most vulnerable in terms of what we import from China? And what sparks that question is, it seems like during COVID, we learned that for a lot of medical things, pharmaceuticals and so forth, we were leaning very heavily on the Chinese to provide those for us.
Certainly, and I think with critical minerals, that's especially relevant. I mean, instead of tariffing, say, Chinese lithium, which we would need for industrial production, they're going out of their way to have some sort of product system that isn't the most beneficial for the United States. So I think domestically, what the U.S. should do is focus more on its own shipbuilding industry. President Trump had a fantastic example of that in his joint address to Congress recently, saying that he's opening an office of U.S. shipbuilding. How is that going to help us with China? Well, one, we have to stop relying on a bad faith actor to try and, follow through on agreements that they're not going to do, but also that China has a 232 times larger shipbuilding capacity than the U.S. It's terrible in that regard, and not many people are speaking out about it. So I really do hope that the United States, when it comes to free market policies, especially with China, they will be able to pivot themselves in a better way to compete with someone who needs to be held accountable.
Once again, we are visiting with Alex Rosado. He is a Young Voices contributor. And Alex, I appreciate your insights on this. Again, this is not stuff I would just sit down and read an article and go, oh, yes, I get it. It's wonderful to be able to ask you these questions. Where can people follow you on social media?
can follow me on Twitter/X at AlexPRosado.
Very good. Well, looking forward to our next conversation.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to it.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment today on Moving Forward with Young Voices. I am happy to welcome a new contributor to the program. His name is Gerry Regep. And Gerry, it's good to have you on the show. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do for those who are meeting you for the first time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. Like you said, my name is Gerry Regep. I'm a current second-year law student at the Indiana University Maurer School of Law. I'm originally from the Chicagoland area. I am passionate about civil rights, all things free speech, and I'm excited to be here.
Well, this is a very interesting time to live in where, as far as free speech is concerned, in that there are a lot of different challenges arising. I'm looking at an article that you wrote for thecollegefix.com. The title is Indiana University walks back controversial speech ban, but some say not far enough. Talk to me about what exactly did they enact at Indiana University that affected free speech?
Well, Brian, let me step back and give you a little bit of context. So across the United States, in the fall, around October, many universities were witnessing a great deal of strife and unrest and an uptick in protest in response to the ongoing crisis regarding Israel and Palestine. As months went on, many schools saw challenges to protests, administrative overreach, and a whole host of students and faculty members either getting cited for violating different university policies or in some cases even getting arrested. On my own Indiana University's campus, you can picture a law student taking his or her criminal law exam in the spring, only to find out that there were state police officers stationed on top of buildings in response to some of our own protests. And so the context there is that my understanding is the Indiana University administrators, in response to some of the more egregious or intense scenarios going on in other campuses, such as NYU in New York or Columbia University, changed our overnight policy so that protesters were no longer allowed to engage in overnight encampments. Students were cited in violations of the policy. And our university campus has been in sort of an overall conversation about how best to move forward ever since. The policy is somewhat simple. In April, in response to the policies, the university administrators and several stakeholders got together throughout the summer, and they enacted a broad overnight speech ban that was put in place in August that essentially, from the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m., banned overnight expression.
Wow. I don't imagine the ACLU took that one lying down.
No. And so you can imagine, at least insofar as how the policy was drafted when it was initially put in place, something as simple as walking across campus at 2 a.m. in the morning while talking about an issue of public concern with a friend or even a faculty member inside of an academic building could be seen as violating the policy as it was written at the time. And so in response to that language, the American Civil Liberties Union filed suit, I believe in early on in August when the policy was originally enacted, challenging the policy on First Amendment grounds for a whole host of reasons.
So if I'm understanding correctly, the initial intent behind such a policy was because maybe not at Indiana University, but at other schools, some of those protests were getting pretty violent and pretty rowdy and vandalism and intimidation and stuff. So I can see them wanting to head that off, but did they have to revisit this at some point and say, okay, we want to make it clear that if you're doing something peaceful, that, sending an email or something, that wouldn't necessarily count? Or did they stand firm on the original policy?
Well, to be fair to the Indiana University community, I believe, if my memory serves me right, there were some reported instances of vandalism or damage to our broader campus area known to be used for public expression, known on campus as Dunn Meadow. However, in response to the ACLU's initial lawsuit, the university revised its policy in November to account for some additional changes from the faculty and student community. beginning of the year, there were a group of students and faculty members who had held several silent candlelight vigils to mourn, ironically enough, the loss of free speech on Indiana's campus. And so for several weeks at a time, you had students and faculty members consciously and purposely violating the policy with what was an otherwise peaceful, non-disruptive demonstration overnight. And so in November, the university amended its policy to provide a little bit more guidance as to what the policy covers and what it doesn't. And so the policy in November went from a blanket overnight ban on expression to only prohibiting protesting, making speeches, and circulating petitions overnight. But it allowed members of the IU community to engage in, quote, spontaneously and contemporaneously assembling and spontaneous and contemporaneous assembly. Where the policy fell short, however, which is what the ACLU is still challenging to date, is the fact that the policy doesn't outline, define, or further explain what activities fall under the category of protesting, making speeches, or circulating petitions overnight.
Wow. I mean, is there a middle ground? Will they ever find a place where people can agree that this is enough free speech that people can freely express a point of view without somebody else saying, but that leads to dangerous or possibly, demonstration type behavior? It seems like that might not be so easy to find.
Well, I think you have two ends of a spectrum here. I think on one hand, I think it's reasonable and I think it's reasonable to have a great deal of empathy for college administrators who have to walk a delicate balance in promoting order and maintaining safety on campus. On the other end of the spectrum, you have a university campus that's traditionally been known as a bastion for free expression and the marketplace of ideas and learning and self-development that comes with expressing yourself on a college campus. And so you have these competing interests of sort of order and safety and liberty and freedom on the other end. And that's a delicate balance to navigate as a college administrator. At the same time, I think anytime a university enacts restrictions on speech, they ought to be reasonable, they ought to be clear, and they ought not to burden more free speech than is necessary to maintain things like safety and order on campus. And I certainly think there's a middle ground there, not only for places like IU, but for all universities going through this very sort of conflict and challenge on their university campuses.
And actually, that was my next question for you was, are there other schools that are struggling with this very same issue? And have they found anything that seems promising to strike that balance?
Well, I can't think of any universities that have, or at least I can't recall any that have amended their policies since. I imagine there's been plenty of universities with ongoing discussions with their student communities who have amended their initial policies in the wake of the 2023 Israel-Palestine protests. But I am aware of several university campuses that have also had similar overnight bans on expression, such as Ohio State, the University of South Florida, and the California State University system as well. You have other policies at other universities. And again, this differs from private to public, but to my understanding, Harvard enacted a pre-approval process for chalk on the sidewalks. And so you have a wide range of ways in which universities are sort of responding to these ongoing concerns of free expression versus safety. But again, to your point earlier, I do think there's a middle ground to be had.
So one final question for you. We got about a minute left here. Gerry, what kind of hazard is there when we have to write out, okay, so this is what's allowed? It seems like that list could become very expansive, or it could also miss a lot of things too. Is it easier to basically list these are the things that are not allowed than to specify what is allowed?
No, I think that's a fair question. I mean, in a perfect world, I think free speech for the win all day, every day. However, I think the more clear and detailed a university policy can be so that students have fair notice of what's allowed and what's not, when and where it's allowed, the better. The main crux of the issue is a student should know when spontaneous assembly crosses the line into protest. And so if you require students to cross-reference their university activities with state constitutions or state policies, that to me seems rather unreasonable. And so I like when a university has clear policies that clearly delineate what a student is allowed to do and when they're allowed to do it.
Again, we're talking with Gerry Regep. He is with Indiana University Maurer School of Law and a Young Voices contributor. Gerry, where can people follow you on social media?
Sure. You can. I have a Muckrack account, easily findable. Gerry Regep, Muckrack. I have a contributor account on thecollegefix.com, and I post all of my public commentary on my LinkedIn. You can search up Gerry Regep as well. Thank you for having me, Brian.